Well, this week I found myself underneath my house in freezing conditions with my son in a crawl space while I'm dealing with the consequences of cancer and the side effects increasing throughout the day, trying to thaw out a frozen water pipe because, well, one, if we don't have water, we're kind of in trouble because we have several more days of freezing conditions as well as a secondary kind of winter storm developing and going to get us again. So we don't have the time to wait to try to deal with this issue. And this isn't really a podcast episode about the pipe or the winter storm. It's really using this as a parallel to allow us to see the consequences of cumulative stress on us individually, but cumulatively in our patient care, dynamics with our crew, family, etc. This applies to anybody out there as a first responder, high performer, because it essentially is the consequences of cumulative stress are a little more sneaky than maybe one gigantic stressful event, but a slow little chisel, erosion, degrading of you becomes a huge problem later. That's why we're trying to increase awareness in this, help us self recognize so that we can be able to get in front of it and start orienting ourselves back on the right track. So, thank you all for joining on this episode of the FMB podcast, Winter Ops Edition. Glad to have you. Buckle up, visors down. Let's get into it.
Don't forget to hit the notification bell down below, comment, like, and subscribe so you can be up to date on all of FNB's shenanigans. He gets IFR, inclement weather, turbulent every single time. We are glad to have you aboard. Let's get into Winter Ops, like Medic Barry.
So to really tee all of this off, to show and drive this home, we got to kind of take a couple steps back here. Right before we went into this, really monumental storm that this country really got to see amongst most of the states, 40 states, I think, and a 2,300 long oblong style storm, really, historic snow and ice and all that fun stuff for most of us in the country. And right before that, I was dealing with the consequences of cancer, the treatments just really hitting me hard, the doctors not seeing me as a typical patient and requiring me, or at least pushing me to go to a comprehensive cancer center. We're not having a lot of trust and faith in our system of cancer doctors at the moment. And so all of that, cancer alone by itself is a singular stressor that is enough to really cripple you and your family, interpersonally, individually, collectively, all of it. And to add to that, when we start talking about cumulative stress, the storm, the preparations, thinking about medications, do I have enough? It's a $10,000 medication. And, fighting the insurances and dealing with all that right up to the storm. Then the storm hits and all of the news and the media kind of hammering it that it's going to be potentially catastrophic, especially where we live. And so the stress about that, how are we going to plan? So we made the inevitable decision to get out of the rural area and go more in town because and I know from a public safety standpoint, the resources and the things that exist within the city high population areas are much more abundant than out in the rural. We're second or third, fourth, fifth on the priority list when we're in the rural. So I knew putting us in the city was a better option with family so that we had access to better, roads and infrastructure, et cetera. And so we did that and everything seemed to be okay. And we had the one night of loss of power, which created a lot of initial concern, but we were prepared, but still creates stress, right? So you're seeing as we go through this cancer, the doctor switches, the storm and all the potential that it could cause, the moving and relocation, the power outage, starting to really stress that system, really lean on those structures and infrastructure of you inside your family, your unit, everything is really being pushed to its limit. And that's not the end, right? We're still going to go through this and show the problem here. Sidebar, during this, it was really fascinating to hear frozen ice crickle and pop and snap, and the sound of it was rather interesting. It was perplexing to me to sit there and listen to this white noise, staticky sound, because we didn't get a lot of snow. We got more just rain that was ice and the way that was hitting the ground. It was wild for me, and it was an experience to say the least, especially being a Floridian for the most part of my life. After that one incident of power outage, we had some moments of sliding down the hill and kind of doing some fun activities, which I feel is really important to note when we're going through storms, storms have little pockets that aren't as intense or violent as other parts of the storm. And so when you find yourself in a pocket where you're like, okay, this isn't as bad, take advantage of it. Find a little joy, find a little something to give you some reprieve so that you have more strength to keep going through this storm that you're enduring, whether that's financial, whether that's mental health, whether that's physical health, whether that's relational. It doesn't matter. Storm is a storm. It just may look differently in intensity and length of time for you, but it's still a storm. And a storm is not completely condensed with only bad if you've got an eye for the weak spots. And so then, we tried to get back to the house and the roads were just closed and the ice was so significant. It was just not worth the risk. So we had to wait a number of days in order to get access to the house. Then when we get to the house, I noticed everything seemed fine, right? But that's interesting. Let's stop there. How many times have you gone through the consistent stressors and felt like, well, everything feels okay. Like it's not great, but things feel perceivably fine. What if there is fractures in the surface underneath that are giving you little hints, but we're not keying up to it because in the first responder world, we're so used to dysfunction equals normal. And so because of that, the red flags don't look red. We don't see them waving in our face. The alarms aren't going off because we're so desensitized to the alarms, right? Well, I get to the house and do further investigation and find that the frozen pipe intake is completely frozen. We have no access to water. So with all that being said, we now had to go into damage control mode, figure out what was going on, how to thaw it out. Being from more of the South, I don't necessarily have all the tools to do so and to go to the store and try to find some heating boxes, essentially, to put down. We were crawling underneath the house in cobwebs and dust and dirt in order to try to heat this pipe up, to warm it up. And I'm sure some construction person out there is going to say, this is not smart. We didn't have really much of a choice because essentially we had several more days of freezing temperatures and another storm that's coming in a couple of days. So we had to do something. And the heaters that were available were non-existent. We had to go far and wide to find something. So here's that stacked stress, more stress. We inevitably, end of story, basically, get the blockage, the ice plug freed. And we're like, yes, awesome, right? And so that really takes us to this point here that when we essentially have a combination of stressors that all come together, we have degraded operations. Our mission, our patient, our objective, whatever we're trying to do in the high performer environment degrades. No matter what you say, there's human psychology and everything that would suggest that the more we apply to ourselves, the worse it gets. We end up getting what's called cognitive narrowing. We task fixate, and we have delayed recognition of cumulative stress because it's kind of hard to recognize we're getting cumulative stress when the strikes come one after the other. Pop, pop, pop. We don't necessarily know. We're so focused on the initial hit, we're forgetting the one before it because we're just trying to deal with the one that's coming at us, right? We kind of forget the one that hit us right before, and we're not necessarily, because we're getting jarred over and over again, we're not connecting the dots. Hold on a minute. This is cumulative, right? Here's a decision point we need to really recognize. Slowing down decisions despite pressure. That whole thing is slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? Slowing it down is very important. And Jocko Willing talks about that beautifully when he explains, stepping back in that moment to make that pivotal decision. When we're all fixated and target fixated on that, thing, we can't see the next move. Sometimes stepping back is critical. Prioritizing systems is very important. You, crew, patient, public, if you're not okay, I don't care what you say, eventually you will pay the price. Remember, the body keeps receipts. And it sucks, but it's true. And so we can only ignore ourselves for so long. And I am a victim of that. I am 100% a victim of just saying, everybody else is my priority. I am not, forever and ever, amen, until it wasn't. And I had to become the priority because there was no choice with the medical conditions and all of this stuff I was forced to have to. So let me rephrase. When is persistence dangerous? When is having just that fifth gear actually a detriment? Because there's this dichotomy, right? That going beyond what you think you have, digging deep and finding that, excess is great. However, when does that become a detriment? When does that become a toxic trait and can hurt you? And I know there'll be some confrontations and some kickbacks. So, throw it at me in the comment section. I really would like to hear your take. But do you think you can be so persistent to a point in which it becomes dangerous to you, the crew, the patient, or, your family, whatever? Could it be detrimental? Could it cause more problems at a certain point? I think so. So here's the key takeaway. So this isn't about fixing a pipe. This is about when multiple systems degrade all at once, this kind of cumulative stress, your job isn't to be tougher, just tough it out, right? Toughness without awareness is self-destruction. It's to be more intentional, surgical, and think smarter, not harder, right? So here is something just to reflect on. Notice when you're compensating. Am I compensating for something? We're good at this in the patient care world and the first responder world. When are they in compensated shock? When are they not? There's signs to this patient when they're decompensating. We know, we can see it. There's objective data in some, things that we can see that tells us they're decompensating. Are you compensating right now? Stacked stress changes our judgment. When things are stacking, it changes how we respond, how we make decisions. And if we're in a job that is high performer, high octane, everything, life and death comes at the expense of our decisions, we better be aware of that stress. We can't just go, well, I'm stressed, but put it off to the side. Doesn't mean you have to engage with it fully while you're in the middle of a mission objective, right? Because sometimes your feelings and stuff will get in the way, but you have to know they're there. We have to know they're existing and residing inside our mind so that we don't let them come and get us out of nowhere, or they sneak up and hit you when you're in the middle of something crucial, paramount, life changing. So with that being said, really appreciate y'all on this episode of the podcast. Thank you all for joining the Winter Ops edition of FMB.